So sound recording equipment, what are the basics, what do we need to know? Well, it's fairly simple once you know which microphone you're using. I know this sounds simple, but it can really affect the way that the sound is recorded. So the main two types of microphone are cardioid, unidirectional microphones, and omnidirectional. So there's two differences there. So the cardioid microphone is probably the more common one, and what that does is it records sound in just one direction. So the microphone is facing the subject, and it records the sound just coming from that direction, from the subject. It won't record anything else from behind the microphone. That's really, really great, because then you know you're going to get clear sound from where your subject is talking, and you don't have to worry about any external sound. That's great if you're not using a really, really expensive hired studio like I mentioned earlier. Say you're just using a room in another building, you might be worried about sound coming from other rooms. A directional microphone should hopefully ignore that sound. But you might be using an omnidirectional microphone. These are slightly different because they record sound from every direction, hence omnidirectional. So those are great if you've got multiple subjects in a large studio and you want to capture each person speaking and a majority of sound from the studio. But they do have their challenges as well. So you can't have the crew being really, really loud because it will capture all sound. So it's just a case of what works for you and what microphone you're using. But once you know that, you can then start to position the microphone and position your subject. So it's a key thing to remember. There's also lapel mics, which clip on to the subject and record sound from there. They work in similar ways to the directional microphones. So again, if you're using a lapel mic, it's just a case of knowing which direction you want it pointing in and how loud your levels are. So the levels is something that I briefly want to touch on too, because they are also really, really important. So the levels of the microphone is essentially how much sound it's picking up. If your levels are really, really quiet, then the subject is going to sound really, really quiet. But if your levels are really, really loud, really, really high levels, then you're going to have a really, really loud subject. And it's just a case of trial and error really here. The levels basically determine how much sound you're capturing. So if your levels are really high, just be careful that you're not capturing too much sound. And what's a great thing about most sound recording equipment, and whatever you're using, you should be able to find this, is a bar on the sound recording equipment, on the software, which shows the levels that your subject is hitting on the microphone. Now this goes from green to amber to red. So you know that if your subject is in the green area of the levels, they sound good, and it's not too loud, it's not too quiet. If it starts hitting amber and red, that's when you need to start looking at the levels and start noticing, okay, maybe this is recording too loud. But that's it, just basics of microphones and levels, nothing too in-depth. Again, we can do another video on sound recording equipment specifically, but that's just some of the basics of studio sound recording. And again, once you've got those levels and once you've got your microphone set up, that's it. It's simple, because for the most part, your subject isn't going to move. So that's sound recording equipment. I'm briefly going to touch on the green screen now. So green screens. I just want to mention briefly one of the things that I look out for when I'm filming in a studio environment with a green screen, because like I said before, it can get complicated and there are quite a few things that you need to look out for. So we will talk about it in another video, but for now, one of the things that I look out for, the main thing that I look out for when I'm filming with a green screen, is how the green screen looks behind the subject. And what I mean by this is, how many creases are there in the green screen? Is it creating a flat block of color? That's really where your problems come from. If your green screen isn't pulled tight enough and there are creases in it, then this can start casting odd shadows in the actual green screen itself. And what this does when you're editing is it makes the process much harder because you can't pick one green color to remove. It might leave some stuff in, and that can really, really affect your footage. It can essentially ruin the footage that you filmed. It might make it unusable, and you might have to go in and do it again, which is the last thing you want after a long studio session. So if you've got a cloth green screen that you put up and take down at the end of every studio session, just make sure that there aren't any creases when you put it up. If you've got to get something like a steamer, you can find them fairly cheaply. That makes a big difference. If you steam the green screen after you've put it up, that just removes some of those final creases once you've pulled it tight. And once you've done that, you create a nice green block of color, and that essentially removes any problems that you have when editing with a green screen. But I will talk about green screens more in another video, but for now, that's essentially it. Those are the very, very basics of setting up with lights, camera, sound, green screen when you're in a studio. Now, I'd like to talk more about each of these elements, and each of these elements when you're filming on location or on set, they all change very, very slightly. So there will be more to talk about with each of these elements, but for now, that's it. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope that you found this useful, and I hope you got some useful information out of it. If you're filming in a studio, hopefully some of these things have made that process slightly easier for you. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you on the next Empire Toolkit video.